There are many reasons why we connect with the games we love, the gameplay, the art, the musical score. But of all the things that bind us to our favourite games, nothing has the endurance of a good story. It's for this reason that we're here in Orange County at Obsidian Entertainment to talk to a team about a game that was almost willed into existence by its fans. You see, our story focuses on the collaboration of two industry veterans, old friends who are responsible for giving birth to one of the most beloved game franchises of all time, how they honed their craft, went their separate ways, and eventually got the band back together. But it's also a story about a new generation of developers, many of whom were inspired into the profession by playing those old games. Today's story is the first in a set of videos about how Obsidian Entertainment created the Outer Worlds. Some videos will dive into writing, others into areas of world building and combat. So, fair warning, we're not going to get into the endgame, but there will be spoilers dotted throughout this series. And like any good tale, this one has an interesting backstory. At a Los Angeles-based studio called Interplay, where a producer named Tim was handed the keys to a post-apocalyptic wasteland and asked his colleague Leonard for help.
The best thing for my career ever was that Tim, unlike a lot of people when they're handed a project, like when he was handed Fallout, he was just the lead programmer originally. And then the producer had so many SKUs or games they were working on, they kind of just handed it off to Tim to be the lead on the whole game. And most people, when they get that opportunity, are just like, this whole game is my vision. Tim came to me and he's like, I don't know anything about art, so you just do whatever you want. So that was, really nice to have that kind of freedom. And, we just had a really good working relationship from then. When we started talking about doing this here, it was just, there was no question that we have the opportunity to do this again, we should definitely go for it. It started out with 6 people, 5-6 people. And then for a long time it was 12 people. And then at the end it was 35?
Yeah, maybe the last 6 months we had about 30 people.
For most of the project, it was a very small project.
What was fun is everybody was kind of making the same game, and the rest of the company was kind of ignoring us because right after we started, they got the D&D license. So most of the people were concentrating on the D&D games. So we were kind of off in a corner by ourselves.
We felt like little kids getting away with something. We're like, rubbing our hands together. Ooh, what if we did this? We really kind of realized what a unique opportunity it was at the time to be given a small bag of money, not a large bag, but a small bag of money, and being told basically make whatever game you want.
And it went through a lot of iterations.
Yeah.
It was aliens, and then it was first started out fantasy, and then it was going to be like aliens. We talked about time travel at one point with dinosaurs.
I was really proud of it. I felt like we had done a lot of the things we set out to do. Obviously, there's always things you want to do better or put more features in, but I was really proud of it.
We got very little press coverage. We were anticipating, hey, look, maybe we're going to get a magazine cover, so we'd made some art for it. Nobody wanted a magazine cover. And then we'd actually started working on another game, and Fallout just kind of took off a few months after it shipped. I think Fallout 2, because it was bigger and had a lot more features from the base Fallout, was the one that a lot of people remember as the big game.
Yeah, we left after doing the initial design for the main story arc and a lot of the design changes for that game to start our own company. Interplay was a fantastic place to work when we first started, and it was still pretty good when we left. It's just we kind of saw the writing on the wall. They ended up having a hit with Baldur's Gate after we left, so they hung on a little bit longer than we thought. But we just, in our naive youth, we thought that we, knew better. Like, oh, they're making all these wrong decisions, and we just want to kind of go back to making a game by ourselves. Once Fallout came out and it became obvious that people liked it and it was going to be a thing, all of a sudden all these people were interested in it, whereas before no one cared. And so people who we'd never seen before were telling us, what we should do, and we're just like, we don't want to do this anymore. So we just wanted to kind of get back to square one and start over. And plus we felt like the culture of Interplay was changing, so we wanted to kind of recreate that at Troika.
I think we made 3 really good games. We made Arcanum, Temple of Elemental Evil, and Bloodlines. A lot of work though. Didn't realize how much work the business side was, so we kept losing time to the business side, and then we'd work late.
Yeah, the biggest thing I learned is I don't want to run a company again.
Yeah, me too.
Making Arcanum was fantastic. There started to be more issues when we got into Temple and Vampire. But Arcanum was pretty much what we wanted, but it was a really, really small team, and everybody was kind of a very flat hierarchy. There was no producers, no managers. It was just all of us 15, 16 people developing the game.
Before Troika Games folded, they'd been working on a pitch for a third Fallout game, but were ultimately outbid by Bethesda. The two went their separate ways but stayed local. Tim ended up working at Carbine Studios on the MMO WildStar, while Leonard spent a decade at Blizzard as lead world designer on Diablo 3 and its expansion. Fast forward to 2011 and the news breaks that Tim Cain has left Carbine to join Obsidian Entertainment, and our spaghetti of games industry personalities and famous franchises is about to get a little bit more complicated. You see, Obsidian was founded by a number of developers who worked at Black Isle, a subsidiary of Interplay that was created after the success of Fallout. This team, many of whom had worked with Tim and Leonard on the first Fallout, would go on to make its sequel, and a bunch of other great games, Planescape Torment, Icewind Dale, and they even helped BioWare on Baldur's Gate. After founding Obsidian, they continued to create beloved RPGs, taking the reins over two BioWare franchises in Neverwinter Nights 2 and Knights of the Old Republic 2. Eventually, they'd be hired by Bethesda to make their own first-person Fallout game. And while New Vegas had a rocky launch, it's regarded by many as the strongest first-person Fallout, especially to those who were fans of the factions and reputation system of Fallout 2. But there would be no fond reunion for Tim. He joined Obsidian 2 years after the release of New Vegas, while the studio was working on South Park: The Stick of Truth and Pillars of Eternity. It would be a number of years before he'd get the chance to make his first-person role-playing game. But when he did what he always did. He called his friend Leonard.
I came here in 2011, and I worked on South Park and Pillars of Eternity. And then in 2016, they were asking to start a new project, and they wanted it to be a new IP. And I didn't think I could do that without Leonard, because he's much better he's great at characters and I'm not. We work on story together, but he pretty much does all the heavy lifting on that. So I basically told them if they wanted me to be a game director, I'd like them to hire Leonard, and they did. What was great too was we were actually locked in a room right across the hall here for like 3 months. Just
they didn't let us out. They just kept us in there.
Slid pizza under the door. And we just worked on the IP, and it was great. It was like, all of a sudden it was like the early 90s again, and we were just having fun and putting together IP ideas.
Yeah, it just started clicking immediately. There was never any searching for what we were gonna do or like wondering about our direction. It was just like we hit the ground running. We immediately started talking about it. And within the first couple of days, we had some of the basics of what the game ended up being. Basically, it was a first-person RPG, with the, Fallout New Vegas kind of feel, I think was the main thing. The Fallout meets Firefly thing was floated around as well. And then me and Tim immediately just started talking about things we wanted to have. Phineas, the main scientist, came almost immediately. The fact that you were a frozen colonist, we love the fact in Fallout, you came from a place where you didn't know anything, and we love when the player character and the player are really close in terms of what they know, especially in an RPG, it really works well. Tim had already started putting together ideas for corporations. He played around a lot with those and the silliness of them and the humor there. We knew immediately we wanted to have a good dose of humor, because that's our dark humor is what's kind of like been the signature of our games all the way through. And then once we had a couple of those things in place, then it started to become more obvious, at least to me, about the dystopia and if the corporations actually were in control, and all that stuff just kind of snowballed from there.
So we put together a prototype 6 months in. This prototype could demonstrate the 3 main ways of playing the game: the combat, the stealth, and the dialogue. We had the cover grass working early on. We had the stealth awareness states working early on, inside and outside, with doors and line of sight and sound. Most of you probably remember Nigel, who guarded the door to this facility. Most of you killed him. Remember when we used to have the circular called shot device where you could select what combat effect you wanted to do?
Well, we just started with the idea of almost this westward expansion. We kind of mirrored that. aesthetic. So we knew like, okay, spaceships would take the supplies to the planets. How would they then build their landscape? And it was always an echo of the Old West.
At what stage do you think the art team sort of knew what the look was?
Oh, wow, I do remember it was this great art meeting we had actually in this room. And it was this concept piece done by Bobby Hernandez. And it was just this fantastic image of our Old West style street in the future. People saw that and it just clicked. It was like, I understand now what we're building.
That was very much suggested by the fact that we had the corporations, and when that snowballed into them running everything, and then we started talking about how that really kind of started to feel like the turn of the 19th to 20th century mining towns, where the mining companies owned everything. They paid the workers in script, and they could only use it at the company store, kind of thing.
That fit in perfectly with the idea we had of all these corporations that kind of owned chunks of consumer goods. So like, there was a company that made weapons and another company that made armor, and then Spacer's Choice made a little bit of everything, but they were all bad. And it fit in really well with the political side of things that Leonard looks at.
Anti-Clio are a big pharmaceutical food brand corporation. They will do anything they can to make their next product, including like capturing wild beasts, the raptidons, experimenting on them, and being able to make diet toothpaste. Spacer's Choice is the brand that will make the product. They know it's a little shaky at the end and wanted to make things always rickety and not quite fit right with each other.
The thing that we knew we had to have, before anything else, was that we had to really nail the tone. Because we called it the Fallout special sauce, which was, my darkness, my dark humor, and Tim's silliness. We kind of merged those together. We
don't want it too dark.
Yeah, and not too silly.
Because the game shouldn't make you sad as you play them. But don't make it too silly, because then it's like there's really no gravitas to this game.
But in the case of this game, it was really important because the subject matter was so dark, and so it could be so depressing to play this game and play around in this world. We really want it to be fun. We really want it to be humorous, but have this biting edge to it. That was something that we were really adamant about. We worked really a long time with the writers on to get the tone right, in terms of, okay, this kind of joke is forcing it. We want to underplay it. The people in this world need to feel like if they were real people in this bizarre situation, how would they react? Not cardboard cutouts pointing you to your next objective, things like that. And you can get away with a lot if the people who are delivering the lines feel like they really mean it and they're not like winking at the player or the viewer or wherever it is.
Much of the success of games like The Outer Worlds rests on the details: compelling quests, well-written characters, evocative artwork, and stirring music. We went so deep into conversations on these topics that we've decided to dedicate entire videos to writing, world design, game design, and music. So make sure you subscribe to Noclip to get notified when they go live. But in this video, we're going to keep the perspective broad and focus on how a team, which at its biggest point was only 75 people, produced a game as long and wide as The Outer Worlds. In fact, the length of The Outer Worlds was of particular interest to me. You can sink 100+ hours into many modern RPGs, but The Outer Worlds doesn't offer that type of expansive playthrough. I wanted to know whether this was a reflection of the modest size of the team or a deliberate design choice. The answer, as you've probably come to expect on Noclip, was a little bit of everything.
So I started on Outer Worlds when it was early in production. We were working on what we called the horizontal slice of the game. Basically, we'd done the vertical slice, which was creating one area with all the content and all the features we wanted in the game. And at that point, we were doing blockouts, like basically just grayscale rough layouts for the crit path of the game, just so we can get a beginning to end playthrough of the entire experience to see how that felt. Actually, I did blockouts for an entire planet that was cut from before the game released. So there's probably about 6 months of work that I did that didn't actually release with the game. After blocking out the horizontal slice to the original spec, we realized we had way more game than we had any chance of actually finishing. So that was with the first round of cuts.
We had to cut some chunks out of the main story, but we did it early enough so it didn't feel disjointed. But we felt we could have built to the end a little bit better. I know that's one thing I've seen people feel like the end kind of jumps up all of a sudden without much warning, and I feel we could have built a little bit towards that, and that was one of the things that kind of cut back on.
We originally had an overland map for Terra 2 that was as big as the one on Monarch. So that kind of hurt to cut that because it makes all the areas on Terra 2, Roseway and Byzantium and Edgewater kind of feel disjointed. It was just hard figuring out, because this is also the first game we made here using Unreal 4. Like Scylla went together really quickly, a lot faster than our other maps. And we didn't have a feel for, when something was on paper, exactly how long it was going to take until we actually did it.
This was the first project we made using Unreal 4. So a lot of the tools and pipelines we were trying to get up to the speed that we needed to. And certain things we just assumed we'd be able to do more quickly than we could, so we had to make a lot of cuts.
Monarch was particularly difficult because there were so many teams working on one map that they would often get in their way, or somebody would we couldn't do lighting until all the area designers were done, so a lot of things got pushed off.
And then we realized, well, the game's actually a bit smaller than we want it to be, so we looked at things like Scylla as an example. This was a new environment that was actually fairly quick and easy for art to generate, that we could actually build out very quickly, that would give us more play space but wouldn't have a high cost on the art end. Yeah, basically there was a lot of things that were on areas that were cut from the game, and Scylla was a place that had no crit path content going through it. It was just side quests, so a lot of the companion quests just managed to be relocated there because nothing really required you to go there other than the companion quest. So
where else would a hermit drug lady be?
Exactly. Oh, that was actually the only quest that was originally designed for Scylla.
Oh, really?
Was the Vicar Max Hermit quest. The pirate area for Felix's quest was actually on another planet that got relocated there, and then the other side quest, like for Nyoka, got relocated there as well.
Luckily, we've got a lot of failures under our belt because one of the things we talked about was the original Fallout only had 3 of those. You call them hard points, but they're kind of like story choke points, where Arcanum had 27. We said somewhere between that and those numbers are the correct number, because 3 wasn't long enough and 27 was much too long. So when we looked at the story, we kind of thought of what the logical acts were. And we started out immediately going, the first act has to be getting your ship. That defined all of Edgewater, and all the different things that happened there was all like, I need to get that part. And then after that, we're like, well, they can go anywhere they want in the system. So then we had to think of like how we wanted the story to unfold and what those choke points would be.
We kind of hit the big beats of the story, and then we're like, okay, what if the player does this at this point? And try to think of all the different things they could do. So it's almost like we start with one path and then add all the others. Sometimes they all come together at once. Sometimes we really have to kind of, rack our brains for how this one major point is going to be different for different players who make different choices. In the past, we've kind of just winged it. With this game, we try to have more restraint, and our strike teams and our area designers working with the narrative designers had a really good feel for how to control those things.
So usually for area designers at Obsidian, we're responsible for both the layout of areas and also a lot of the quest design. For quests, we work with our narrative team to figure out the overall objectives and the stories we're trying to tell through those quests. But we're responsible for actually implementing and designing the layout and the flow of quests in areas. We start with a paper design, like a top-down design, just like to iterate to make sure that overall relative spacing of things makes sense. And then we do a quick basic texturing, basic layout, and then just start running through and making sure okay, from this point, can you see the objective we're trying to reach, or is it hidden? If it's hidden, is there another POI that draws you in that direction so that players have at least a goal in front of them as often as possible? And then usually try and get as much feedback as possible, which is always hard on a gray block map because it's so basic. There's not really any good textures or any interesting detail there. There's a lot of feedback you get that you have to kind of listen to and understand that's coming from okay, that'll be addressed when we get the art pass in, or that'll be addressed when we get VFX in to draw the player in that direction.
While the critical path of the game may have been shorter than intended, RPGs are laboured with the responsibility of allowing players to play through them in many different ways. We covered the design of combat, stealth and dialogue in an upcoming video. But expectations also change the complexity of these systems, so I asked Tim and Leonard whether it's possible to make a game accessible to less experienced players without disappointing hardcore RPG fans.
Back then, the only people into RPGs were people who were hardcore. They knew the system backwards and forwards. You knew you didn't have to explain anything that was going. They just know it already. But new RPG players, they don't necessarily want to have to be taught all these systems ahead of time. I try to explain it this way because people were worried we weren't going to try to get complex people. I imagined RPGs as being a big mountain. 40 years ago, you had to rock climb up the mountain. Now we've paved a really nice road with switchbacks and scenic overlooks. The view from the top of the mountain is still as nice, but it's easier to get there. But some of the people who are rock climbing are like, in my day, I had to rock climb to get that view. And it's like, that's great. And now you can just you can drive up there in 15 minutes. That doesn't mean the view isn't as good. So I wanted to come up with an RPG that if you wanted to rock climb up it, fine. But if you wanted to take the drive up, it was easy to learn things and you didn't have to know how everything worked when you started.
One of our pillars for the game as a whole was that it's kind of very easy or very accessible on the top layer, and then you could dig down as far as you want. Same thing with the story. We tried to make sure that even if you tried to get through the dialogues as quickly as possible, you had enough of an understanding about what was going on and what you're supposed to be doing to get you through the game. And then of course, if you wanted to dig down deep and pick every option you could, that hopefully that would be entertaining as well, but you didn't need to do all that. We wanted people to be able to opt in, not only in deciding what character they're playing, but how they were going to play the game as well.
Our producer, Eric, just liked to shoot people as soon as he saw them. So not only was he missing out on all the dialogue, he made it challenging for us to figure out how to advance storylines when no one could talk to you. Because he didn't talk to anybody the whole game. He had no idea what the VO was, what the character dialogues were like. If he saw someone, he shot them.
Yeah, but you make it sound like that's a new thing. Eric worked with us at Interplay, and he played Fallout by punching everybody, and found a bug that way because he played the whole game by punching everybody.
Yeah.
So even from way back then, we've known if you decide you're going to have to be able to kill everybody in the game, you need alternate ways of getting this information. So that's part of it. Like, because we always said you have to be able to fight, sneak, or steal your way through the game. Part of fighting is like, I'm just going to kill everybody. So that's part of like when we're going down the list of what we need to make sure happens at every point, or options the player has at every point account for those things.
If you didn't want to tinker with items, you didn't have to. If you didn't want to do anything with the mods on weapons, you didn't have to. If you didn't want to play around with science weapons, if you just wanted to use them as a basic weapon, you could. But then if you upped your science skill, they got better and better. And we just liked things like that were good enough basically, but then fun to extend.
On this project, scope control seemed to be given priority. While cutting features, a companion, an open world hub, and even a planet must have been painful, it was more important that the team weren't spread too thin creatively. But I wanted to know how Tim and Leonard felt about where the game ended up.
When we were talking to the game, and I remember we had team meetings about this, I said, look, if the biggest complaint about our game is that it's too small and people want more of it, that's good. Because if you make a really good game, of course people get to the end and they're like, I want more. It was only 20 hours, it was only 30 hours, it was 40 hours. People kept asking us how long the game was, and it was so hard to answer because you can finish it really quickly, and with certain kind of characters and other type of characters take a lot longer. But in this particular one, I think we were really happy we told our story, we had lots of side quests, we had lots of interesting companion characters, and we were really happy with the scope.
From the very beginning, we wanted to make a shorter game so that we could focus more on the replayability and the choices, because the more choices and branching you give the player, the more content you actually have to create. So that's a limiting factor itself. But I think that's one area where maybe I'm a little less happy, because I feel like we had to make one cut too many. All through the project, we're making cuts. We started out with a smaller scope in mind, and then we found out that was too big as we went, and we made several rounds of cuts. And I think our last cut for me was the painful one, because I feel like I would have liked to have a little bit more depth in some of our characters. I wish you could have dug a little bit deeper into who our companions were and had a little bit more reactivity there. But at the end of the day, as Tim said, if somebody says the biggest problem with your game is it's too short, that means they liked it. And we've all played games where they were an awesome game for the first 2/3, and you're like, okay, I'm ready to play the end game. Oh, I have 20 more hours. Yeah, and then it just starts to become a slog, and it kind of colors your perception of what the game was originally. That's one of the pluses of having it be a shorter game too, is that people won't feel like they're, by the end of it, they're just so burned out they don't want to do it again. So they could easily jump back in and check some of these things out.
The Outer Worlds is just one game that was being developed at Obsidian at that time. It was published by Take-Two Interactive subsidiary Private Division, but during production, Obsidian was bought out by Microsoft. From our time at the studio, the fallout seems to have been handled well. During production of this series, we were talking to Private Division PR throughout, and it seemed like there was an amicable relationship between the two, even if their working relationship is coming to a close. But before we wrap this one up, I wanted to know what effect, if any, the Microsoft buyout had had on the development of The Outer Worlds.
What was interesting is even though Obsidian was being purchased the last year we were making this for Private Division. So we were kind of in our own bubble. It's super cool that it did this well and that Microsoft likes it. That was a side effect. That was like not on our initial list of things to do. It's a happy side effect.
Yeah, and I mean, it's great that it seems that way, and it's great that it now looks like we're going to have a fantastic future. But we approached it the way we have always approached games. It was always about the game. It was always about the game that we wanted to make, that we thought the fans would want to play. You can't worry about the other stuff because that's out of your control. We just had to concentrate on the stuff that we could control and deal with.
And creatively, you're satisfied?
Never. There's a lot of stuff I'm really proud of in it. I think that we did a lot of things we set out to do, but like with the cuts and just, I've always been, you're always looking at the game you wanted to make as opposed to the game that you ended up making. And
I'm happy.
Yeah. But however, I have to say, and this is where me and Tim differ, on Fallout, I think Fallout was the only game where we shipped it, and I'm like, that was exactly the game I wanted to make. It was perfect. And Tim was like, well, so
I had this laundry list of other things I wanted to do.
Yeah, so I think that was just my youthful naivete at the time.
He was like Felix.
Yeah.
Now he's more like Max.
But I'm really proud of it. I mean, I'm really happy we did it. I think it did most, if not all, of what we set out to do. But I'm always dissatisfied. I was an artist my whole life, so I'm never going to be happy with what we create.
So you guys aren't done making games together?
Hopefully not.
No reason to be not.
The last documentary we filmed was actually just north of here with the folks in Mobius who made Outer Wilds. We've asked them this question. When did you name the game, and did you know about them when it happened? Or
we went through a lot of names.
Yeah.
We went through a lot of different names. We couldn't find one we liked. And ones we did find we liked had already were trademarked for other games or something else. And we came up with the Outer Worlds, and we started circulating that around. And then I found out that there was an Outer Wilds, and everybody else seemed to be like, well, we're not sure that that's a concern. It's a small game. It's an indie game. I'm like, I don't know. But I didn't have anything better, and we had gone, this was a month-long process. This wasn't like an easy, we'll just name it this. So this was something that we finally were all able to get on board with, and I think that was why, even after we found out that there was crossover, that we still went forward. I regret that now, but
that's something people don't know though. It is agonizingly difficult to name a game.
Yeah,
you know what your game is. You have a really good feel for it, but then you're asked put it in a word or two. And you're like,
one of the pushbacks that I heard was that, well, they're coming out like 6 to 8 months before you guys, so it won't be a problem.
Then they say,
and of course, yeah, it's like, what? Have none of us made games before? We know these things aren't like set in stone; they're not guaranteed. So yeah, I sat next to him I just did a New York Game Awards thing the other day, and I ended up sitting next to one of the guys from Outer Wilds, and we laughed about it. But I felt bad because, I'm glad that not only was it a fantastic game, but that they got a lot of press and that they weren't, lost in the shuffle because, we obviously were part of a bigger company with a bigger marketing push. And I was concerned about that. I didn't want somebody who'd, had this labor of love, a small indie game to, be sidelined by us. And they just did a fantastic job and got a lot of recognition. So that made me happy.